Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. Do you ever stop to wonder why certain types of people just instantly piss you off? Maybe it's a kid in class who never stops being cringe, or people who sing all the time, or a friend who constantly hogs the spotlight. According to the philosophy of Carl Jung, there might be something deep within you that's just like that annoying person. It's the part of us that we refuse to see, our shadow. But embracing this part of us might bring forth answers to questions about ourselves we've always had. In this episode, we'll dive into Carl Jung's groundbreaking ideas about the human mind, exploring the hidden world of the unconscious. You'll learn how to confront your shadow, because if you do not, you will slowly become the very thing you despise. Imagine what it takes to be the kind of person willing to spend an entire lifetime digging into the depths of the human mind. Does such a person become more human, or do they trade their humanity in the process of finding meaning? All the great thinkers throughout history likely encountered this dilemma as they dug deeper into the human psyche. A man who wasn't spared from that fate is Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. Jung is pretty well known as a pioneer in his fields, particularly because he did a lot more than study the mind. He mapped it out like an explorer charting unknown territories. His work laid the foundation for some of the biggest ideas in technology today, from personality types to concepts like the inner child. At least that's how textbooks describe him. However, he wasn't some sage who found understanding after a week of meditation. To understand why he was able to provide reliable insights for many people, it's best to take a peek into the life that led him down a road that he paved with his own hands, and perhaps extra hands some of you may be familiar with. To help guide us through this journey, I've brought along my friend Noah, who will take it over from here.
Jung was born in 1875 in Keswill, Switzerland. The son of a pastor, Jung respected his father, but found that his rigid religious beliefs were too confining to follow into adulthood. This was the first clash between spiritualism and skepticism, planting seeds that would allow him to genuinely explore his eventual fascination with the unconscious mind. Jung spent a lot of time alone as a kid, often daydreaming and reflecting on his own thoughts. He later described this period as his first ever encounter with the unconscious, a theme that would go on to dominate his life's work. Originally pursuing medicine, Jung had no inclination towards clinical psychology, but an interest in mental illness led him to psychiatry. How this sprung up is fascinating. At some point in his mid-30s, Carl Jung experienced what he described as a horrible confrontation with the unconscious, one where he saw visions and heard voices. It got to the point where he even began to worry that he was menaced by a psychosis or doing a schizophrenia. It makes you wonder, if his knowledge of mental illness wasn't advanced, would he have had the chance to emerge from this confrontation, or would he have succumbed as another nameless victim of his time? Thankfully, we got the former. Due to these events, in 1900, Jung decided to transition into working at the Burghölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich. It was here that he began studying patients with schizophrenia. This location was also his first encounter with Sigmund Freud's work. Soon after looking into Freud's ideas, he made contact with him, and the two began exchanging letters. Quickly, the pair gained a friendly and intellectually stimulating relationship. They would often engage in strong debates on Freud's work, and over time, Jung rose through the ranks of psychoanalysis and became Freud's protege. He evolved into the man that Freud believed was fit to carry on his legacy. But Jung didn't stop at Freud's theories. He expanded on them, sometimes in radical ways. While Freud was fixated on repressed sexual desires and the influence of childhood on individuals, Jung believed that the human mind was more than a fleshy storage unit for past traumas. He envisioned the psyche as a self-regulating system that strives to maintain balance and develop itself. He also believed that it consists of 3 layers. The ego. This is the conscious mind, or the part of us that interacts with our world. It's your sense of self. It's the voice that you hear when you're thinking, like, for example, right now. You are aware that you're watching this video, and that voice in your head is telling you this. The personal unconscious. This is sort of like a personal storage unit for forgotten memories and suppressed emotions. It's highly unique to each person. And finally, the collective unconscious. Now, this is where Jung really broke new ground in psychology. This concept is one that is centered on a new approach, one where the personal unconscious is the product of a deep, universal layer of unconscious that all humans share. This collective unconscious is filled with the archetypes that can be found among people. In other words, primal symbols and motifs that appear in myths, dreams, and stories across cultures that have never made contact with each other. For example, you'll find some variation of dragons as a myth in cultures located vast oceans away from each other. That's an archetype. However, for Jung, these archetypes help to better define human behavior. Among the many archetypes that Carl Jung defined, there were 4 that he identified as the most influential on human behavior. The persona, the mask that we wear in public. It's the version of ourselves that we present to the world, one that's shaped by societal expectations. The shadow, the part of ourselves that we deny, reject, or hide. It's the thing that is behind our repressed desires and impulses, like the culmination of everything that we would never admit that we are. Anima or Animus. The inner feminine side within men is the anima, while the masculine side within women is the animus. To Jung, integrating either aspects as they apply to genders could lead to a better psychological balance. The self. This is the ultimate goal of Jungian psychology. The self is what represents a union between the conscious and unconscious mind, creating wholeness and individuation. But before we look further into that, let's take a peek at some of the interesting archetypes proposed by Jung. While those 4 are the most well-known, there are others worth learning about as you dig deeper into Jungian philosophy. An archetype that might quickly grab your attention is the Puer Aeternus, or eternal child. This archetype reflects a person that resists growing up, much like the fictional character Peter Pan. In fact, some psychologists actually refer to it as Peter Pan syndrome. You most likely know a Peter Pan in your life, the person who peaked in high school and can't seem to let the past go. They avoid responsibility and are stuck in a rebellious teen phase. While these people can inspire wonder and creativity, if left unchecked, they can become stuck in a loop of escapism, often lost in a fantasy version of who they are, unable to put in the work that it takes to make their ideas a reality. If you can relate to this, recognizing the traits of this archetype can be the first step towards personal growth. Another intriguing but less popular archetype is the Senex, or wise old man, one that serves as a symbol of wisdom and guidance. You'll often find these figures in dreams or stories as mentors, like for example Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars trilogy. This archetype can help individuals find direction during periods of tough time or uncertainty. Despite finding a tight-knit friendship, the nature of their works mixed with individual brilliance meant that there would be disagreements between Jung and Freud. But it wasn't just because of professional disagreements that they grew apart. It was tied to how Freud believed that sexual desires were the primal driver for human behavior. But Jung thought that this was far too narrow, maintaining that the idea could go further than that. Jung argued that myths, spirituality, and a person's search for meaning played just as important a role in shaping the human psyche. These ideological differences became a rift that never fully healed. With some hard lines drawn, it was clear that Jung's departure from Freud's circle was much bigger than a personal matter. It was more like a split between the field of psychology itself. Freud's legacy would eventually evolve into psychoanalysis. Meanwhile, Jung carved out a completely new path called analytical psychology. This approach was quite broad, emphasizing the importance of personal growth, symbol interpretation, and the internal journey towards self-discovery. Understanding who Jung was and how he developed his theories is helpful when looking deeper into the concepts we'll explore later in this video, from shadow work to individuation. The Swiss psychologist's ideas offer a roadmap for anyone seeking to understand themselves better. But his theories weren't flawless ideas accepted by all psychologists. Toward the end of this episode, we'll take a look at the resistance that Jung faced, especially from Freudian circles. For now, though, let's take a leap of faith into the shadow, where the hidden parts of ourselves await in hope and misery. You're at a party when you meet a loud, attention-seeking person who wants to start a dance circle. You've always disliked when people try to make themselves the main character out in public. You're not quite sure when it started. In some ways, you feel like you've always been this way. You roll your eyes thinking, I could never be like that. But what if that reaction wasn't a simple bit of annoyance? What if it was a reflection of something hidden and buried deep inside you? This discomfort you may start to feel is a doorway into one of Carl Jung's most compelling ideas, the shadow, one of the 4 core archetypes. Jung described the shadow as a part of our psyche where we stuff away traits, emotions, and desires that we find incompatible with who we think we are. It's kind of a psychological junk drawer that holds parts of ourselves that we'd rather not acknowledge. You know, that stuff that you never want to see yourself as, jealous, greedy, or spiteful. But out of sight doesn't always mean out of mind. The shadow has ways of sneaking into our lives, such as showing up in projections. Like the moment that you see that person at a party and for a brief moment you see your repressed qualities in other people. A mother scolds her daughter for being outspoken, confident, and friendly with people. On the surface, it might look like this mom is just a mean and harsh person. But the shadow tells a different story. The mother could have been much like her daughter early on in life, but that changed when she faced rejection for being too much. Growing up in a small town where tall poppy syndrome was a thing, a term used to describe bringing down successful individuals who stand out. She lost the job for outshining her boss, and her friends abandoned her for being a pick-me because she was outspoken. With such experience in her youth, the mother buried those parts of herself, learning to value quiet humility instead. Now, seeing her daughter embody that same boldness stirs uncomfortable emotions, and instead of confronting the shadow, she lashes out. Unbeknownst to her, it's not her daughter's behavior she despises, but the echoes of her younger self, a person she worked so hard to repress. The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. Carl Jung. This is how the shadow dances in our lives, slipping through generations and relationships. It's a strong reminder that our judgments often reflect inner wounds, not objective truths. Once we recognize these dynamics in our relationships, empathy can quickly replace frustration. The mother's scolding is more than a harsh reaction. It's an invitation to heal. By acknowledging the hidden parts of ourselves, we soften our edges and inch closer to self-acceptance. But what do we do once we encounter the shadow? To Jung, confronting this part of ourselves could unlock growth and more self-awareness. This process is known as shadow work. Shadow work isn't a fancy term to lucid dream your way into defeating your inner demons, as cool as that sounds. Instead, it's a bit like befriending the monster under your bed. By facing the parts of us that have only known darkness for so long, we reduce their hold on us and reclaim the energy we once spent suppressing them. In practice, it looks like this: journaling about moments where you had strong emotional reactions, asking yourself, what part of me is this situation reflecting? Or working with a therapist trained in Jungian analysis. Yes, you can engage with professionally trained therapists on this topic. Modern psychology has embraced shadow work as a tool for healing, and you'll often find therapists who guide patients in exploring unresolved childhood experiences or repeated patterns in relationships, helping trace these patterns back to unacknowledged parts of their psyche. Even outside of a therapist's office, people tend to use shadow work as a form of personal growth, exploring guided meditations, self-reflection exercises, and even dream analysis, all to engage with their inner self. At its core, the concept of shadow reminds us that growth isn't about becoming a new person. Contrary to the popular advice about reinventing yourself, shadow work encourages us to move closer to wholeness by embracing the light and dark sides within us. Do you ever walk into a crowded room filled with conversation and laughter, yet you feel like a ghost? You're present but unseen. It's like everyone else is plugged into something greater, and you're not. Instead, you stand apart, disconnected. This peculiar loneliness, this sensation where you're surrounded but unknown, is one that points to something much deeper than mere isolation. To Carl Jung, it reveals a fragmented self, longing for integration. The antidote to this? Individuation. Now, individuation sounds like a fancy word to justify self-isolation. If you listen closely though, it might just help you discover ways for you to be your most authentic self among others. In many ways, individuation is a lifelong process of becoming your true self. It's the process that people go through as they achieve a distinct and stable personality. It's not really about self-improvement. At least not in the conventional sense. With individuation, you're not adopting new habits or polishing aspects of yourself that you consider weak. Instead, it centers on uncovering and integrating the most disparate parts of yourself. You know, the thing in you that sees something and makes you automatically think, I'd never do that in a million years. The ego, the shadow, the anima/animus, and the self are all integral to this delicate dance within. Once these elements are aligned, we are able to step a little closer to wholeness. However, if they are rejected or ignored, we drift further away from our essence. This amplifies feelings of alienation, and the worst part about that is constantly trying to fill the hole with things that will never truly fix you. Individuation isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but with it, you stand a chance to handle your inner turmoil with strengths you haven't truly realized are there. Loneliness is often a signal that this inner work is being neglected. Because of that, we attempt to fill this void externally by seeking attention, admiration, and validation. We start to hold on to the hope that if others notice us, maybe the ache inside will subside. Social media doesn't help with this tendency either, encouraging main character energy, where one's life is curated for an audience. We slowly become performers in our own stories, desperate for validation and applause. Yet, Jung argues that this pursuit is hollow. How is this possible? For one, individuation teaches that fulfillment doesn't come from being seen, but from seeing ourselves and others with clarity. Mix that with a healthy dose of compassion, and things start to make a lot more sense. Let's use this example. You scroll through your Instagram feed, occasionally pausing when you're looking at a perfectly curated life of an acquaintance. As you stare intensely at their photos, you feel a twinge of envy arising. Rather than dismissing this bitter emotion in embarrassment, consider this moment as an invitation to experience individuation. What could be the unmet desire or repressed quality that this envy highlights? Do you envy their holiday photos because you're secretly longing for adventure? Do you talk down about them returning to their ex for the third time because you're secretly scared nobody loves you enough to want to keep trying? Do you have secondhand embarrassment for their weird TikTok videos because you've had to keep up an appearance of being put together? All it comes down to is the parts of yourself that have gone unnoticed. Individuation asks you to sit with these feelings in totality, no judgment, just you looking in the mirror and unraveling the messages held within your discomfort. This process of turning inward is what helps cultivate a richer connection to the self. In a paradoxical way, it also lessens loneliness. As we engage in deep self-reflection, we grow and become better equipped to engage with the world authentically. Slowly, the need for external validation fades, and it's replaced by a cool, quiet confidence, one that is entirely rooted in self-awareness. A practical approach to individuation and, by extension, combating loneliness involves shifting our focus outward. Now, sure, this may seem counterintuitive, but by noticing others constantly striving to be noticed, we dissolve the barriers that isolate us. So the next time you're outside, instead of thinking about how depressing it is that you don't have many friends, try something new, living outside of your own head. Consider striking up a genuine conversation with someone who often fades into the background, the types of people that you'd think of as NPCs, a delivery guy or a shop owner. Nothing too crazy, just a little bit of human connection. Pay attention to the unnoticed details of their story. By building a habit out of a simple act, you can experience some transformative changes in your own life. As you learn to see others deeply, we mirror that same sort of attention inwards, fostering the same recognition within ourselves. It all starts to make sense once you draw it out in your own head. If there are parts of you that aren't ever seen as relevant within your own self, you're likely using a similar level of harshness in how you judge other people to some extent. Jung believed that solitude was an essential ingredient in individuation. But it's not the loneliness that happens when you're disconnected from the world around you. Instead, it's the solitude that exists when you're in tune with the unconscious mind. Through constant practices like meditation, journaling, and creative expression, we're able to engage with the hidden parts of our psyche, allowing the unconscious mind to finally speak. These solitary moments are what weave together the fractured aspects of the self, drawing us ever closer to psychological wholeness. To begin this journey, here are some practical steps worth looking into. Engaging in creative outlets. Creativity is often overlooked in the journey towards self-improvement, but being familiar with who you are and how your mind prefers to express itself is crucial. Art, music, and writing are the source of things that bypass our ego's defenses, allowing hidden aspects of ourselves to surface. Forget about producing a masterpiece. Instead, create for the sake of exploration. It's the journey or process itself where the true value lies. Therapeutic exploration. Jungian analysis or other depth-oriented therapies are strong sources for a sense of structure towards individuation. A trained therapist can guide you in steps like engaging with the shadow, uncovering projections you've held towards other people, and integrating unconscious material. Practicing mindfulness. When you're able to carve out moments of stillness every day, it'll go a long way in getting you comfortable with being yourself. It also allows you to reflect on emotional triggers, recurring conflicts, or intense reactions. Asking yourself, what part of me is being activated here, is a helpful way to unlock some profound insights. Building authentic connections. Individuation thrives in a relationship. This goes beyond the romantic side of things and into communities or friendships where vulnerability is encouraged. By sharing your inner world with others, you can accelerate individuation, revealing hidden strengths and blind spots within. Journaling emotions and dreams. Dreams are seen as the language of the unconscious. They offer clues about neglected parts of our psyche. When you keep a journal by your bed and quickly write down your dreams upon waking, you'll gain some cool insights. Over time, symbols and patterns start to emerge, pointing to areas of yourself in need of integration. Instead of viewing life as some sort of performance, you start to fully inhabit it. The loneliness fades not because the external world shifts, but because you're able to deepen a relationship with yourself. You start to recognize that the connections you seek outwardly are, at their core, a reflection of the connections that you've cultivated within. Jung's perspective on individuation isn't some far-fetched ideal meant for philosophers or mystics. It's for the everyday person, a practical path laid bare for anyone willing to engage with their inner landscape. While the journey is sure to be solitary at times, it leads us back to the collective, making us more connected, whole, and a lot more at peace with who we really are. Although Carl Jung has proven himself to be a helpful voice in the field of psychology today, his influence hasn't been met without a healthy amount of skepticism. Concepts like the shadow, archetypes, and the collective unconscious have helped to shape psychotherapy, pop culture, and literature. Yet critics have had one specific issue with the philosophy, and the issue in question is the metaphysical nature of Jung's theories. To put it simply, there are a lot of people who feel that Jung's work can't really be tested with science or put in practical terms. If we truly want to fully appreciate this iconic philosopher's work, it's essential to explore his strongest criticisms and the debates they've ignited within psychology as a whole. It's well established that Jung was seen as Freud's protege and potential successor. both agreed on a lot, especially in their interests in the unconscious mind. As we noted earlier, their philosophical paths eventually diverged, and this led them to some significant theoretical clashes. Freud, who is known for his psychoanalytical framework, emphasized the importance of sexual drives and repressed desires as the primary forces that shape human behavior. Creating a model of the psyche, he believed that our behavior revolved around the id, ego, and superego, painting an image of humanity that's largely driven by our early childhood experiences. For Jung, he proposed a broader, more spiritual view of the unconscious. Instead of focusing solely on the personal feelings of repression, he introduced the collective unconscious as an idea, using it as a collection of shared archetypes and symbols that our species inherited from our ancients. Critics believe that Jung's departure from Freud's beliefs pushed him in a direction that was much more imaginative than his old friend. However, it also lacked the empirical foundations that were emphasized and maintained by Freud. By choosing to focus on symbols, myths, and dreams, Jungian psychology felt too out there, and some considered it to be in speculative territory. Now, the biggest part of Jungian philosophy that raises eyebrows is his mysticism. This is a person who was never one to shy away from astrology, alchemy, or religious symbolism. Jung was ready to explore the human psyche in ways that had never been done before. This further cemented his reputation as a thinker who constantly straddled the line between metaphysics and psychology. Some interesting things about Jung include his belief in synchronicity, the idea that coincidences always have a meaningful connection. He also used tarot cards and an I Ching, an ancient Chinese text that functions similarly to tarots. These resources helped Jung better understand the psyche, but he also drew sharp criticism from numerous contemporary psychologists who preferred to be more grounded in empirical research. Some argue that Jung's embrace of mysticism tends to detract from his work's credibility. Modern psychology is something that prioritizes constant results that are repeatable with tests and data-driven methods. Meanwhile, with Jungian analysis, there's a lot of emphasis on subjective experience, which means that it struggles to meet the criteria set out by modern standards. There are critics like Richard Knoll, an award-winning author known for the Jung cult, The Origins of a Charismatic Movement, who believe that Jung's approach is a quasi-spiritual movement rather than a scientific discipline, even going further to claim that Jung's approach is similar to that of a religious leader, not a psychologist. This mystical quality, which is often the subject of criticism for Jung, is also what makes him so appealing. The innate willingness to engage with the unknown and explore the mind is something that resonates with certain types of people. You know, the sort of people who seek meaning beyond the confines of materialism. For many, Jungian psychology is what offers a bridge between science and spirituality. It addresses questions of purpose, transformation, and identity, the things that psychological models tend to overlook. Another common critic of Carl Jung's work lies in the complexity it brings, yet there aren't many practical ways to apply them. When you take a look at concepts like the Anima and Animus, Individuation, and the shadow, there's this abstract way that they are described. This makes it difficult for the average person to implement in their daily life or fully grasp. Unlike something along the lines of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a form of treatment that uses clear, structured techniques when addressing mental health issues. In Jungian analysis, things tend to feel slow-moving or for a niche audience. With individuation, there's a strong belief that it's an essential element for psychological growth, yet it lacks any clear or actionable steps. Critics argue that without any concrete methods, Jungian therapy is really just a type of introspective exercise that yields basically no tangible progress. In clinical settings, this ambiguity can get frustrating for patients seeking immediate relief from their psychological distress. In the 21st century, you'll notice that Jungian psychology has evolved quite a lot. Some practitioners have attempted to ground some of Carl's ideas into contemporary research. Neuroscience is a field that has started to show interest in the role of the unconscious. particularly in the ideas like the unconscious mind and its role in influencing patterns of behavior. This heavily echoes Jung's notion of archetypes. Yet, we also have some modern psychologists like Jordan Peterson who draws heavily from Jungian ideas in his writings and lectures. He also has faced a lot of criticism for oversimplifying or misrepresenting Jung's more nuanced theories. Peterson's take on concepts like the shadow has introduced Jung to wider audiences, but it has also sparked a debate on whether or not these simplifications dilute the richness of Jung's original work. One thing Jungian psychologists can't seem to shake away from is this portrayal of the Anima and Animus. Arguments are often made about the description of these inner figures as they tend to reinforce gender stereotypes. On one side, femininity is seen as emotional and passive, while masculinity is represented as strength and logic. While Jungian analysts point towards the fluid and constantly evolving nature of these archetypes, critics argue that such frameworks actually risk promoting outdated notions of gender roles. Despite the strong criticisms, Jung's work continues to prove valuable. His theories invite exploration into the inner world in ways that extend beyond diagnosing symptoms. Instead of feeling like a checklist, Jungian psychology encourages a holistic approach to mental health. Although some of his ideas can't withstand scientific scrutiny, they still offer tools for self-discovery and artistic inspiration. On a deeper level, criticisms of Jung mirror the dualities that he sought to explore in his work, especially relating to science versus spirituality. Jung's greatest contribution doesn't lie in providing definitive answers to questions, but rather promoting us to ask much deeper questions about the nature of the human mind and the mysteries shaping our existence. Carl Jung's ideas didn't fade out with the 20th century. No, they've woven themselves into the very fabric of today's art, pop culture, and psychology. His exploration of archetypes and the collective unconscious play a major role in the ways stories are told and how we understand ourselves. In cinema, we can easily see this impact on some of the most iconic works of our time. Directors like Christopher Nolan, George Lucas, and David Lynch have openly drawn from Jungian philosophy to craft complex and symbolic narratives. The hero's journey storytelling structure, popularized by mythologist Joseph Campbell, himself a devout student of Jung, is the basis of countless blockbusters ranging from Star Wars to The Matrix. These stories resonate so deeply with audiences because they mirror the archetypes and patterns described by Jung in his work. This philosophy is so relatable, it helps pop culture by reflecting humanity's shared psychological experiences. Outside of film, Jung's ideas are solidified in music, literature, and even video games. The concept of a battle between light and dark, a search for self-actualization, and an integration of the shadow are recurring themes found in countless creative works. Artists usually channel the unconscious to make their best work, transforming personal and collective symbols into expressions that are understood universally. Now that we live in an era of identity exploration and increased mental health awareness, taking a look at Jung's emphasis on individuation feels more relevant than ever. His work offers something beyond simple insights. Instead, it's a map for those seeking meaning in an increasingly fragmented world.